That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
The CIA played more of a quartermaster's role in the campaign. They stood back and let the Pakistan army do the direct training of the Mujahideen. This was something that the Pakistanis insisted upon.
It appears that at some point, according to Ahmed Rashid, the Pakistani ISI, the intelligence agency, introduced Osama bin Laden to the leaders of the Taliban. And he helped them financially. Some people say to the tune of $3 million.
In those days, he was a young man who had committed himself to helping the Afghan Mujahedin liberate themselves from the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. And he was doing a lot of good. He was bringing support and aid to the Mujahideen.
MI6 supplied small arms, they supplied money, principally they supplied radio equipment.
SIS was authorized to actively involve itself inside Afghanistan. Obviously, it was a very sensitive matter.
It's quite clear and apparent that MI6 was involved, to what degree we do not know, but certainly was involved to some extent with groups that were part of the al-Qaeda network.
What kind of sophisticated operations?
Oh, that I couldn't possibly tell you.
Osama bin Laden was an ally of the United States. He was killing Soviet soldiers. That's what we wanted.
Ali Mohammed calls the FBI, and the FBI intervenes to some extent. I don't think you have to be an agent who has worked, terrorism all their life to realize something is terribly amiss here.
The reason why the government didn't want Ali Mohammed to come to trial, which became clear with the benefit of hindsight, was that he was an operative and he was working through various intelligence agencies.
The notion that the United States had nothing in its possession prior to 9/11, that al-Qaeda had even thought about using a plane as a weapon, frankly, doesn't hold up.
Ali Mohammed helped train some of the people who later carried out the World Trade Center bombing, went back to Afghanistan and helped train a lot of the top leadership in al-Qaeda.
The idea was in 1995 when it was first mooted by Unocal, the American oil company, that the Taliban in southern Afghanistan would act like a security force for the building and the construction and looking after such a pipeline.
We had Osama bin Laden essentially cornered in Tora Bora, and for whatever reasons, we did not do what was necessary in order to ensure that he did not escape.
My take on it basically is the fact that there is some sort of a deal in place between the government of Pakistan and the United States.
According to the report, at least one, the FBI's best source in San Diego, suggested Bayoumi may be a Saudi intelligence officer. You can then say that Mr. Bayoumi, according to the report, did certainly help and assist the hijackers.
We cannot prove that high-ranking Saudi officials committed this atrocity. We know for a certainty that they were the terrorists, travel agents, who delivered them well-fed, well-trained, and well-equipped.
9/11 was not an intelligence failure. 9/11 was an intelligence success. It was supposed to happen.
September the 11th, 2001. Al-Qaeda carried out the worst terrorist attack in history. Almost 3,000 people died. But before Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, there were other fanatics who killed civilians for their belief in a radical form of Islam. Men bound by a common ideology, in a movement known as the Muslim Brotherhood. While much about the Brotherhood remains shrouded in mystery, one thing is clear. It is the primary source and inspiration for today's most dangerous Muslim terrorist organizations, including Al-Qaeda.
The Muslim Brotherhood has been the ideological parent for virtually every radical Sunni terrorist movement today. Hamas, Islamic Jihad, al-Qaeda, all of these groups were spawned by the Muslim Brotherhood.
By the dawn of the Cold War, the Brotherhood had become a powerful influence in the Arab world. Evidence suggests that the CIA saw the Brotherhood as a potential ally in uniting Muslims against the Soviet Union. NASA expelled thousands of Brotherhood dissidents. They fled across the Middle East to countries like Saudi Arabia, Syria, Kuwait, and Jordan, where they were able to open new branches of the Brotherhood.
The Muslim Brotherhood used Saudi money and Saudi resources to build its own global network. And that global network also is what became the basic infrastructure for Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda. Sheikh Abdullah Abdel was key Palestinian Brotherhood member who was teaching Osama bin Laden.
Azam had taken Osama bin Laden under his wing in Saudi Arabia in the early 1980s. Bin Laden then followed his teacher to Peshawar, where he began working to develop what would become known as the base, or Al-Qaeda. When bin Laden was introduced to Zawahiri, he was intrigued by his violent vision of jihad.
Ayman Zawahiri is, for all practical purposes, the person who has provided the ideology for Al-Qaeda.
One of Zawahiri's stratagems was the notion of suicide bombing. This relatively new concept for Sunni Muslims would engender future attacks around the world.
Zawahiri was the pioneer of imposing this technique among Sunnis in Egypt, this dreadful technique, which became the calling card for al-Qaeda. Zawahiri was the first to recognize the utility of having a martyr.
Zawahiri became bin Laden's right-hand man. While intelligence specialists insist the Brotherhood continues to attract members in the United States, the State Department does not include the Muslim Brotherhood in its official list of 41 terrorist groups.
On the 3rd of July 1979, President Jimmy Carter secretly authorized the CIA to spend $500,000 in covert support of the Afghan opposition. The modest beginning of a 10-year operation involving billions of dollars. With America's clandestine help, a ragtag army of Afghan tribesmen and farmers defeated one of the world's two superpowers.
U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahedin without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of
the early 1970s, the intelligence services weren't just involved in assassination in Northern Ireland. They were also infiltrating the terrorist networks.
MI6 has been involved in what are known as disruptive operations. One of the techniques that they use is to put one group against another to disrupt what they're involved in.
Of course, the whole idea is to try and create as much confusion as possible so that people are not quite sure what to believe.
You set people very discreetly against one another.
Right.
They destroy each other.
Right. They do.
You don't destroy them. What a pity that so-and-so is so indiscreet. Not much more. Of course, there are much more sophisticated operations than that, but that's roughly the sort of thing.
What kind of sophisticated operations?
That I couldn't possibly tell you.
What we do know is that the key to disruptive action is to work from the inside.
MI6 placed a number of agents within Ireland and the North with the idea of infiltrating the IRA.
And that infiltration goes higher and deeper than you would think.
British intelligence has been very strong in Northern Ireland. There is no question that the IRA and possibly Sinn Féin as well have been infiltrated, possibly almost right up to its senior levels.
Osama bin Laden was an ally of the United States. He was killing Soviet soldiers. That's what we wanted.
Jean-Charles Brissard. He investigated al-Qaeda's finances for the French intelligence service well before 9/11, and he's been following the relationship between bin Laden and Saudi Arabia, especially with his mentor, Prince Turki, ever since.
He was helped by the kingdom, and this support lasted for years. So Turkey, for instance, was the one who met regularly with bin Laden in Afghanistan. Until very recently, until '98, I think the last time, for at least 3 or 4 times, who sent him checks, full suitcases of money, trucks. All that suggests that he was clearly supported by the Saudi government itself.
The Saudis deny it ever happened. But according to investigator Jean-Charles Brissard, French intelligence reports confirm that a meeting did indeed take place in Paris in 1996. Osama bin Laden himself didn't come, but a senior representative did. Also in attendance, bin Laden's old mentor, Saudi Prince Turki, a bin Laden family member, and a number of bankers. According to Brissard, one of those who came to this Paris hotel for that meeting was none other than bin Laden's brother-in-law, Khalid bin Mahfouz, the same man who once financially supported George W. Bush, now negotiating payoffs to Osama bin Laden. And support came from the bin Laden family as well. They publicly proclaimed they'd disowned Osama, but privately, Brissard says, they sent him equipment and money.
A company like the Saudi bin Laden Group is providing all the tools to Osama bin Laden to build a road or an airport in Sudan. Yes, they're clearly financial backers of Osama bin Laden, yeah.
So how much in all did the Saudis contribute to al-Qaeda? Estimates are that before 9/11, bin Laden spent about $50 million a year, the vast majority of them from Saudi Arabia.
What exactly is that? That's one of the documents that were recently seized by our team in Afghanistan, signed by Mullah.
From Bosnia to the Sudan and Afghanistan, Jean-Charles Brissard has discovered an al-Qaeda paper trail that he says proves what the Saudis are still denying.
This leads you to believe it's $2 million, which originates where?
It is stated that it originates from the head that is provided by Saudi Arabia.
Millions in Saudi foreign aid diverted to al-Qaeda. Financial support for terrorist training camps in Afghanistan like this one. Camps run with money, funneled through a Saudi charity, funded, managed, and supervised by royal family members.
They knew everything. They were the source of fundings that went to buy arms, to buy bombs through their charities. And those charities in Saudi Arabia are all controlled by the government to some extent.
Knowing the way he felt about the U.S., knowing he had declared war essentially on all Americans, would they not also have known that by giving him money they were funding ultimately attacks against the U.S.?
Don't you think that the interest of Saudi Arabia from its perspective is more important than the U.S. interest of the U.S.? That's what we experienced, that's what we've seen in the past.
Osama bin Laden was brought up within the Wahhabi doctrine. Some members of the Saudi royal family and Saudi charities fund al-Qaeda, Hamas, and other terrorist organizations. And their clerics have reinterpreted the holy law of Islam, leading many Muslims to believe that terrorism is mandated by the Quran.
The holy law of Islam excludes terrorism in any form. It is clearly and strongly and overwhelmingly against suicide. It is a mortal sin for which there is no forgiveness. Even if a man has lived a life of unremitting virtue, if he kills himself, he forfeits paradise and goes straight to hell. No, the Wahhabis lay down that you may commit suicide provided you take a sufficient number of the infidels with you.
1995, a bomb in Saudi Arabia kills 5 U.S. soldiers. 1996, 19 American servicemen die in another Saudi bombing at the U.S. military's Khobar Towers barracks. 1998, more than 200 perish when truck bombs devastate 2 U.S. embassies in Africa. 2000, an explosion tears apart the USS Cole. 17 American sailors are killed. Though Osama bin Laden was obviously responsible for the majority of those deaths, U.S. intelligence effectively ignored the place that was his recruitment hotbed. The U.S. attitude remained, hear, see, and speak no evil.
Even though there had been the bombings in 95, 96, 98, 2000, all involving Saudis, no one asked for a national intelligence estimate if Saudi Arabia is a new terrorist state.
Is it fair to say financial and political interests in one way or other led to 9/11, Afghanistan, and Iraq?
Absolutely. Financial interests were predominant in Washington. They led to a turning a blind eye to what was happening in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan, and contributed to 9/11. But it doesn't have to be a conspiracy. This is where people will nail you if you say it's a conspiracy. It's not. It's a conspiracy of silence. We're just not going to talk about it.
Cairo, 1984. The Egyptian army dismisses Major Ali Mohammed from the military, and despite his reputation as a dangerous radical, he gets a job as a security advisor with the national airline, Egypt Air. Later that same year, Mohammed appears at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, where he offers his services as an informant. CIA officials in Cairo are skeptical, and the Egyptians warn them that Ali Mohammed is a radical Muslim. Nevertheless, the Cairo office lets its counterparts around the world know that Ali Mohammed is available for assignments. A response comes back from the CIA in West Germany that it could use a man like Ali. Mohammed now undertakes a mission for the CIA. His assignment is to infiltrate a mosque in Hamburg that has ties to Hezbollah. But Mohammed quickly reveals himself.
Ali goes in and over the course of a week, he lets it be known to the people in the mosque that he's actually been sent there at the behest of the agency.
CIA officials quickly discover that Mohammed has betrayed them. The agency declares it has terminated its relationship with him. The U.S. State Department also adds Mohammed's name to a watch list as a suspected terrorist. Even though Mohammed's name is on a watch list, the State Department issues him a visa. One news report later says that Mohammed got past the watch list with CIA help. August the 15th, 1986. Ali Mohammed shows up at this army recruiting office in Oakland, California. He says he wants to enlist. Although the Egyptian military expelled him for his radical beliefs, and although the U.S. State Department has him on a watch list, the U.S. Army accepts him.
My name is Ali Mohammed. I'm a former Egyptian officer.
Peshawar, Pakistan. Mohammed journeys to this bustling town on the border with Afghanistan, where the CIA is running a covert operation to supply weapons to the Mujahideen. From here, Mohammed enters the war zone. Also aiding the Mujahideen from his base in Peshawar is the 17th son of a construction billionaire from Saudi Arabia, Osama bin Laden. 31-year-old bin Laden is funneling money to the rebels from Arab donors. Joining forces with bin Laden is Ali Mohammed's mentor, and now a top leader of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri. By the end of 1988, Afghan forces, with the CIA's help, have driven the Soviets out. The war comes to an end. Autumn 1989. Ali Mohammed finishes his 3-year tour at Fort Bragg. Even though his name has been on a watch list, he is sworn in as a U.S. citizen. San Francisco, California, 1990.
Yes.
Ali Mohammed meets with an FBI agent. It's the next step in his mission. Mohammed offers his services as a translator. During the interview, he tosses out some raw intelligence to prove his worth. As a result of this, the FBI ends up using him not as a translator, but as an informant. One of Mohammed's assignments will be to infiltrate this mosque in Santa Clara, run by a group of radical Palestinians. Just as he did with the CIA in Germany, Mohammed exposes the operation and reveals himself as an FBI plant. But at the time, the FBI does not discover the betrayal. Peshawar, Pakistan, late 1991. At this city near the Afghan border, Ali Mohammed is carrying out a major assignment for al-Qaeda, helping Osama bin Laden move to a new base of operations. Bin Laden has enemies everywhere and needs a personal security force. Mohammed's wife back in California believes he is just away on another business trip. Bin Laden has so much faith in Mohammed that he entrusts him with coordinating the dangerous move and protecting him from attack. They cover 1,600 kilometers by car, sometimes putting bin Laden in disguise. They deliver him to Karachi, Pakistan, where his private jet is waiting. From Karachi, bin Laden travels to Khartoum in Sudan, where the radical Islamic government has agreed to protect him and about 500 of his followers. This becomes bin Laden's new headquarters. Host, Afghanistan. September 1992. Ali Mohammed is at an outpost in the mountains near the Pakistani border. It is home to an international university of terrorists, sponsored by bin Laden. Hundreds of applicants from more than 50 countries worldwide converge here to attend a boot camp. Mohammed is one of the instructors, and he's known as an especially demanding teacher. He drills his students in hand-to-hand combat and explosives. They rehearse for kidnappings and assassinations. They practice surveillance of bombing targets, and they learn to organize a terror cell. Mohammed spends months at a time training al-Qaeda foot soldiers both in Afghanistan and in Sudan. Vancouver, British Columbia, June 1993. 4 months after the World Trade Center bombing, Ali Mohammed is waiting at the airport to pick up an old colleague. The colleague is a 24-year-old fellow Egyptian named Issam Marzouk, one of the men who helped Mohammed move Osama bin Laden out of Afghanistan 2 years earlier. But Marzouk falls foul of the Canadian customs officials. When he tries to slip through using a fake Saudi passport, they arrest him. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police take Marzouk into custody. They also quickly detain Ali Mohammed and question him for hours. Finally, Mohammed gives the Mounties a phone number and asks them to call it. The person who answers the phone vouches for Mohammed. It's his FBI control agent in San Francisco.
Ali Mohammed calls the FBI, and the FBI intervenes to some extent. I don't think you have to be an agent who has worked, terrorism all their life to realize something is terribly amiss here.
With the FBI agent's blessing, the Mounties release Ali Mohammed. When he returns to the US, the FBI takes no action against him. But Mohammed's FBI handler does follow up by conducting an interview with him in San Francisco. Mohammed explains that a man named Osama bin Laden runs an organization called al-Qaeda. He says bin Laden wants to overthrow the Saudi government. He admits to the agent that he has been to Afghanistan and taught at bin Laden's training camps there. He says the subjects included intelligence and hijacking. The FBI agent notifies his superiors in Washington.
To his credit, says, this is a little bit out of my league, so I think I ought to get somebody out here who are a specialist on this. So he contacts FBI headquarters.
The FBI puts in a request for someone with the right kind of expertise in the US military to interview Mohammed. The Pentagon decides to send officers from Fort Meade, Maryland, headquarters of the National Security Agency.
Out from Fort Meade comes military officers who are traveling in the black. In other words, they've got false IDs and everything covering up who they are.
The intelligence officers debrief Mohammed. An FBI agent would later try to find out what Mohammed had told these top-secret officials about bin Laden and his training camps. The Pentagon told him the reports had probably been destroyed. The FBI's San Francisco office has by now established that Ali Mohammed is connected to bin Laden and al-Qaeda. But the Bureau lets him remain free. Mohammed receives a message from his wife. The FBI wants to talk to him immediately. The Bureau wants to know why Mohammed's name has appeared on a list of potential defense witnesses for a major terrorism trial about to begin in New York City. The blind sheikh, Omar Abdul Rahman, and 11 of his followers face charges in the so-called Day of Terror plot to blow up New York bridges and tunnels. Ali Mohammed, still determined to play the part of an FBI informant, decides to honor the Bureau's request for an interview. His fellow terrorists in Nairobi give him the money for the flight back to America. He's about to come face to face with the FBI and those he continues to betray. Mohammed's name came up in connection with the Day of Terror trial because one of the defendants is fellow Egyptian terrorist El-Sayed Nasser. Nasser is already serving time on gun and assault charges at Attica State Prison. His defense attorneys traced the military documents found in Nasser's New Jersey house back to Fort Bragg and Ali Mohammed. To fight these new charges in the Day of Terror plot, Nasser's attorney wants Ali Mohammed to be a key witness.
I wanted anything that had to do with Ali Mohammed because Ali Mohammed was helping the defendants at the same time as he's in the U.S. Army.
The defense wants Mohammed to help make the case to the jury that defendants like Nasser are not guilty because they, like Mohammed, were working on the same side as the U.S. government as far back as the Soviet-Afghan War. As prosecutors and defense attorneys haggle over evidence and witnesses for the Day of Terror trial, Ali Mohammed becomes a highly sensitive subject. In the end, the government makes a concession to the defense. It will acknowledge in open court the role of the U.S. in aiding the rebels in Afghanistan. But it seems prosecutors do not want Ali Mohammed to testify. The defense has a theory as to why.
It was my view that the government did not want Ali Mohammed to testify and that they would do anything in order to prevent that from happening. The reason why the government didn't want Ali Mohammed to come to trial, which became clear with the benefit of hindsight, was that he was an operative and he was working through various intelligence agencies.
August the 20th, 1998. In retaliation for the embassy bombings, President Clinton orders cruise missile strikes on targets in Afghanistan and Sudan. The missile strikes failed to hit bin Laden or other al-Qaeda leaders. Summer 2000. Al-Qaeda's 9/11 hijackers have arrived in the US to train as pilots. Jersey City, New Jersey. Two of the leaders recruited by bin Laden, Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi, are seen near the Sphinx Trading Company, the same place where years earlier the blind sheikh and at least one other member of his terror cell obtained private mailboxes to communicate in secret. Ali Mohammed explained this tactic in his terror training manual, and now it's being used again. The 9/11 plot is in high gear. October the 20th, 2000. Ali Mohammed, wearing leg irons, is led before a federal judge in Manhattan. He waives his right to a jury trial and pleads guilty to conspiracy charges. Mohammed knows he's about to put his fate in the hands of the US justice system. He confesses to his role in the African embassy bombings and implicates bin Laden in the attacks. He admits to his involvement in plots to kill American soldiers in Somalia and Saudi Arabia, and US civilians anywhere in the world. He admits to training terrorists and conspiring to kidnap, murder, and maim. He states that his objective is to force Western powers out of the Middle East. Within an hour, Mohammed's court appearance is over. The judge does not pronounce a sentence. He sets a date for sentencing, but the hearing never takes place. It's an unusual scenario. Mohammed gives up his right to appeal. His defense attorneys raise no objections. Mohammed's file remains sealed. He is removed to a secret location, presumably the witness protection wing of a federal prison. After his guilty plea, Mohammed continues to cooperate with the FBI. At the FBI's request, he even writes lengthy papers on subjects including how terrorists might attack the United Nations headquarters or US warships in the Persian Gulf. February 2001. 4 defendants go on trial in New York for the African embassy bombings, including Mohammed's friend, Lebanese-American Wadi El-Haj. Assistant U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald does not put Mohammed on the stand to testify against them. Doing so could hurt the government's case.
Bottom line is that he has too much baggage. So why take the risk?
May 2001.
Today's guilty verdicts are a triumph for world justice.
The jury finds El-Haj and 3 others guilty of the African embassy bombings. All get life sentences. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., intelligence officials pick up a dizzying array of signs that terrorists are planning a major attack. By the summer of 2001, in the words of CIA Director George Tenet, the system is blinking red. Crawford, Texas, August the 6th, 2001. President George W. Bush, on vacation at his ranch, receives his daily brief prepared by the CIA. It's entitled, Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S. It would appear that at least some intelligence from Ali Mohammed has made its way to the president's desk.
If you look to the 6 or 17 sentences that are in there, what I've seen, all that information came from Ali.
The president's brief says, an Egyptian Islamic Jihad operative told an unnamed service that bin Laden is planning to exploit the operative's access to the U.S. to mount a terrorist strike. Al-Qaeda members have resided in the U.S. for years. a senior EIJ member, lived in California in the mid-1990s. Since his guilty plea in 2000, Ali Mohammed has been meeting with US authorities and sharing details of his terrorist activities. During one such meeting, Mohammed tells the FBI about a plot to crash an aeroplane into the presidential palace in Cairo.
I can tell you that I personally handed a floppy disk with every one of Ali's propositions to the CIA. The reaction I got was rather tepid. You know, that's historical. The notion that the United States had nothing in its possession prior to 9/11, that al-Qaeda had even thought about using a plane as a weapon, frankly, doesn't hold up.
When the towers fall, Ali Mohammed is immediately confined to his cell in the witness protection wing of an undisclosed federal prison, with no access to news reports. The following week, the FBI has him brought to this New York City jail for another interview.
So I walked in and I said, well, tell me how they did it. What he laid out was the attack as if he knew every detail of it.
Mohammed explains how the hijackers have to position themselves, some in first class, others in economy, and how they hide utility knives in their hand luggage.
It's just kind of eerie.
Did this mean that Ali Mohammed knew how and when al-Qaeda was planning to attack the US?
I think he probably understood that the World Trade Center was a target at some point.
October 2001. 1 month after the terrorist attacks, during the US invasion of Afghanistan, Ali Mohammed provides information to US authorities about the location of al-Qaeda training camps. June the 16th, 2004. The 9/11 Commission holds its final hearings in Washington. In his testimony, U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald shed some light on Ali Mohammed and his deep connections to al-Qaeda.
Ali Mohammed helped train some of the people who later carried out the World Trade Center bombing, went back to Afghanistan and helped train a lot of the top leadership in al-Qaeda. Then he went as a U.S. citizen and surveilled a dozen targets in Nairobi in 1993.
The 9/11 Commission's final report mentions Ali Mohammed only briefly. Yet there are few figures who have had such a sweeping influence on the evolution of al-Qaeda. Mohammed's name appears nowhere in the federal prison system. To this day, his legal status and his whereabouts are closely guarded secrets. His own attorneys declined to comment for this program. There is no public record that he was sentenced. By many accounts, he is still in a federal prison somewhere.
The reality is he's still being consulted as we speak today. He still has insights. His thinking has been considered very important. And so U.S. investigators, prosecutors, FBI agents still meet with him regularly. But he's not going to be leaving prison anytime soon.
But one defense lawyer in the African embassy case believes that Mohammed's value as a source of intelligence must be diminishing as the years go by.
So at some point, I assume the government will say, we have gotten everything we can and everything we need out of Ali Mohammed. I think the most likely thing that will happen is he'll be released, he'll be given a new name and a new identity, and he will pick up a life someplace.
The United States doesn't see what the Arabs see. The American will not listen to him because the Americans see what they want to see and hear what they want to hear.
In Afghanistan, where the number of American ground troops continues to grow, the government of Hamid Karzai has resurrected the once ill-fated idea of a pipeline across Afghanistan from Central Asian oil fields and gas fields.
Peter Dale Scott has written extensively about hidden agendas in U.S. foreign policy.
There are people in the administration who believe out and out that this is the American century, that it is the time for American hegemony. Both Republicans and Democrats have said we shouldn't worry so much about what our allies think. It's, I think, pretty clear now to everybody that America has a oil geostrategy in that part of the world.
The U.S. National Energy Policy Report demanded a priority on easing U.S. access to Persian Gulf oil supplies.
America needs to control the world oil system. And the fact that we have put U.S. troops in Georgia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, even in Kyrgyzstan, 200 miles from the West Chinese border, all those troops there are nominally in the name of fighting the terrorists, but in reality, they have established an American presence in the great oil basin of the Caspian, and people more and more admitting that America is a serious player in that area now because of the troops we put in.
But the U.S. continued to push for alternative pipelines out of the area. The most audacious idea was announced to great fanfare in 1995 by the dictator of Turkmenistan, Sapomurad Niyazov. It was the back door to Central Asian gas fields, crossing war-torn Afghanistan to Pakistan and eventually India.
The idea was in 1995 when it was first mooted by Unocal, the American oil company, that the Taliban in southern Afghanistan would act like a security force for the building and the construction and looking after such a pipeline.
Pakistani author Ahmed Rashid closely followed the pipeline's development.
The State Department's diplomats were constantly touring the region and were backing the Unocal project.
The pipeline proposal picked up momentum when the Taliban took control of Kabul and much of the country. Unocal began to woo the Taliban. One of their consultants on the pipeline was a former Pentagon official, Zalmay Khalilzad. In 1996, he wrote, "The Taliban does not practice the anti-U.S. style of fundamentalism. We should use as a positive incentive the benefits that will accrue to Afghanistan from construction of oil and gas pipelines," end quote. He was there in late 1997 when Unocal brought a high-level Taliban delegation to Houston. They visited the suburban home of a Unocal executive.
They were given money to do shopping, they were given medical treatment.
The Taliban delegation was taken to the Houston Zoo, the Johnson Space Center, and a swanky downtown shopping mall. The delegation then went to the State Department in Washington. During those same years, though, throughout the 1990s, some key relationships were developing that would take on a whole new level of importance after George W. Bush was elected president. When Chevron signed its first big deal with Kazakhstan, a commitment to invest $20 billion over the next 40 years, Condoleezza Rice was on the Chevron board. Chevron even named a new oil tanker after her. Kazakhstan's foreign minister acknowledges that those personal ties remain critical to his country's continuing close cooperation with the United States.
We used to have a very close relationship with all the old members of the U.S. Republican administration, and I believe that this kind of the relationship is being continued nowadays.
Old interests, new possibilities.
September 11th and the extraordinary events, the tragic events of September 11th, did create a new reality. As with every event, there are opportunities that arise from it.
Indeed, it may well be that Washington has already begun to take advantage of those opportunities.
Well, freedom, justice, and a world rid of terrorism are just some of the stated aims for Operation Enduring Freedom. But is there another reason for bombing Afghanistan? With worldwide demand for oil increasing and some of the Gulf states looking very vulnerable, the U.S. is desperate to tap the oil fields of Kazakhstan and other central states. And as ITN's economic correspondent Lian Halligan now explains, Afghanistan is key when it comes to moving that oil to the West.
The September the 11th atrocities sparked a coalition, a crusade, said George Bush, for freedom and justice. But take a closer look. There's an important subtext to the struggle over Afghanistan: oil. Over the last few years, you may have read that the West, and particularly the US, is becoming less oil dependent. But it's just not true. Back in the 70s, the US used 16 million barrels every day. Today, that's ballooned to 22 million, making America by far the world's biggest oil importer. The European Union used 12 million barrels a day 30 years ago, but now it's 15 million. And oil's not just used for petrol for cars. Right now you're watching a television made of plastic, presumably in a well-warmed room and probably wearing man-made fibres, and all thanks to oil. So where does it all come from? Saudi Arabia, of course, is the biggest exporter, over 7 million barrels every day. Iran, Iraq and Kuwait are big players too. But don't forget the former Soviet Union, which exports almost 4.5 million barrels daily. Apart from Russia, it's these newly independent Central Asian states, particularly Kazakhstan, that are key. Already 20 billion barrels of oil reserves have been found in Kazakhstan, and there could be much more. The oil and gas so far discovered in these parts is worth $3 trillion in today's prices. That's why Western money men are so interested in getting this oil to world markets.
This war was coming for a long time. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had been Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, but who also worked in intelligence roles for Presidents Reagan and Bush 1, co-founder of the Trilateral Commission. He wrote a book in 1997 called The Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and Its Geostrategic Imperatives. And in 3 specific places in that book, he says the key to America's control of the world in the 21st century is the control of Eurasia.
In support of his thesis, Brzezinski states, a power that dominates Eurasia would control 2 of the world's 3 most advanced and economically productive regions, and about 3/4 of the world's known energy resources.
And then he says that without an attack on the order of Pearl Harbor, or without a direct external threat, there was no way that the American people would support the imperial mobilization necessary to control Central Asia. And in this book, again, written in 1997, Brzezinski had a map of where the next world conflict was going to be. And you look at this map in the book, and it's exactly where we're fighting now.
Thompson looked deeper into Pakistan. His timeline showed Osama bin Laden was reportedly last seen in Pakistan after escaping from Tora Bora.
CBS News has exclusive information tonight.
But thanks to an in-depth investigation by CBS, he also learned bin Laden was in Pakistan on the eve of 9/11.
Bin Laden was spirited into this military hospital in Rawalpindi for kidney dialysis treatment. The military had him surrounded, says this hospital employee who also wanted his identity masked. They were saying that Osama bin Laden had to be watched carefully and looked after.
The Taliban are widely alleged to be the creation of Pakistan's military intelligence, the ISI.
There's really no difference between an ISI training camp for terrorism and an al-Qaeda training camp for terrorism. You would have some people working for al-Qaeda, and they would go on to an al-Qaeda mission, and you had other people working for the ISI, and they would go off to Kashmir on one of their missions.
Thompson wondered if ISI involvement in terrorism included the attacks of 9/11. On October 1st, the FBI discovered evidence linking the alleged hijackers and al-Qaeda by following a money trail that ended at Mohammed Atta in Florida.
Suspected hijacker Mohammed Atta received wire transfers via Pakistan and then distributed the cash via money orders bought here in Florida. A senior law enforcement source tells CNN the man sending the money to Atta is believed to be Ahmed Umar Saeed Sheikh.
He reportedly is controlling certain aspects of the financial transactions of the al-Qaeda network.
Once a standout student at the London School of Economics, the British-born son of Pakistani parents speaks 5 languages.
The story made news in every major newspaper. With 9/11 paymaster identified as an alleged al-Qaeda moneyman, it seemed that the U.S. finally had its proof that al-Qaeda was involved. The U.S. war on terror could now move ahead. But what most of his post-9/11 reports about Omar Saeed Sheikh had failed to mention was that at the same time Sheikh dropped out of the London School of Economics to presumably join al-Qaeda. He had also joined the ISI.
Arresting officer A.K. Jain says under questioning, Omar Sheikh admitted he was supported by the Pakistan government's intelligence service, the ISI.
He had told me that.
He admitted to you?
Oh, yes.
And after his release, it was very clear that he was provided protection and safe haven in Pakistan with the direct support, with the knowledge, and obviously with the connivance of the Pakistani intelligence.
Only 2 days after the invasion of Afghanistan, the Times of India reported the FBI discovered credible evidence that $100,000 was wired to alleged hijacker Mohammed Atta by 9/11 paymaster Omar Saeed Sheikh on the orders of the ISI director, Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed.
Had that been the head of the Iraqi intelligence agency, do you think we would have heard of it?
You have to understand that Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed was a key player.
William Pepper is an international lawyer and consultant to the Pakistani government.
Indian state intelligence came upon this transfer. It was then the Times of India was able to get this information, and the FBI got involved in this whole situation because this was now becoming very public as a result of the Indian investigation.
Though the evidence was never publicly disclosed, Indian intelligence claimed that the FBI had privately confirmed the story to them, and it soon made every major Indian newspaper. In the U.S., only a single news outlet even mentioned the allegation. The information was reported as an internet-only story on the editorial section of the Wall Street Journal website.
It had this cutesy title, but it contained this completely explosive information.
After the Times of India story broke, Paymaster Omar Saeed Sheikh was no longer the apparent proof that al-Qaeda was the sole sponsor of the attacks. Instead, Saeed Sheikh, acting on the orders of the ISI, appeared to be the smoking gun of Pakistani involvement in 9/11.
And instantly, within that day, basically, Saeed Sheikh becomes persona non grata. And then a whole bunch of other people are put forth as the paymaster.
Over the next several months, authorities began confusing the news media with a bewildering variety of alternate names for the paymaster, each sounding similar to Omar Saeed Sheikh.
No, it's this guy. No, it's this guy. They keep changing the story about who the guy is, and it becomes hard to keep track.
By the one-year anniversary of 9/11, Newsweek had concluded that the paymaster remains almost a total mystery. The 9/11 Commission would ultimately conclude that the question of who financed the attacks is of little practical significance.
And in my opinion, it seems to be a bunch of smoke and mirrors to try to really hide the fact that there's money coming from the ISI going to the hijackers.
If we were really going after the people who sponsored al-Qaeda, wouldn't we be bombing Pakistan?
Are we better off in Pakistan or in Iraq in terms of beating terrorism? I would say to you, if you'd ask me that question, I would say, no question. Let's forget about Iraq and let's focus on Pakistan.
And here the story took another unexpected turn. Several top news sources had all reported that the Pakistani ISI director had actually been in Washington for a rare visit during the week of September 11th.
Yes, Dr. Rice. Are you aware of the reports at the time that ISI chief was in Washington on September 11 and on September 10, $100,000 was wired from Pakistan to these groups here in this area? And why he was here, was meeting with you or anybody in the administration?
I have not seen that report, and he was certainly not meeting with me. Yes?
LA Weekly reported that on the very evening of September 11th, U.S. State Department officials began negotiating the terms of the U.S.-Pakistani partnership with ISI Director Mahmoud Ahmed, the very man who was alleged to have ordered the wire transfer to Mohammed Atta. The talks continued over the next several days before the Lieutenant General returned to Pakistan on September 14th.
I've come to meet a man who used to live in Pakistan. He tells me he used to spy on al-Qaeda, but was ratted out. He fears for his life so much now, I can't even tell you which country I'm in, never mind which city. What he tells me contradicts Pakistan's stated policy to hunt down al-Qaeda. He says that back in 2006, al-Qaeda's number 2, Ayman al-Zawahiri, was informed ahead of time of a U.S. plan to assassinate him. Did Ayman al-Zawahiri know this attack was coming? Had he been tipped off?
Yes.
He'd been tipped off?
Yes.
Who tipped him off?
ISI.
Pakistani intelligence tipped off Ayman al-Zawahiri.
Because I've told you that they're playing a double game.
That's incredible.
After my security.
I cannot tell you who this man is, but what I can say is that he is a Pakistani and has spied on al-Qaeda. He says that not only is the army aiding Kashmiri freedom fighters, it is also helping al-Qaeda and the Taliban. You've given information to the ISI, Pakistani intelligence services, about the existence of these al-Qaeda camps?
Yes, time to time, yeah.
And what have they done?
They are the main people who are training them.
The Pakistani government is?
Yes.
Training al-Qaeda?
Yes.
How can that happen? The Pakistani government is supposed to be opposed to al-Qaeda.
The retired junior commissioned officers are the main trainers in the camps, training Chechens, Arabs, and some Kashmiris and Afghans.
This video, shot in 1998, shows the bond between al-Qaeda and Pakistan's Kashmiri fighters. They provided protection for Osama bin Laden on the very day he declared war on America. And U.S. military officials have personally told me they know that al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and Kashmiri groups have teamed up.
General Hamid Gul headed the military's notorious inter-services intelligence during the Afghan-Soviet War. He is one of the few military officers in Pakistan who have gone public about his sympathies for the militants.
Do you think that the Pakistani army can actually succeed in Waziristan?
It is very difficult for Pakistan armed forces to fire against people and to kill them ruthlessly with the Cobra helicopter gunships and with your aircraft, because the people on the other side were saying Pakistan Zindabad, long live Pakistan, and they were saying Allahu Akbar, and this side also they were saying Allahu Akbar. What is the cause? Why were you there? Why were you killing these people? They're your own people. It's very difficult to kill your own people, particularly when you know that it's being done under pall of fear and it is being dictated to you by an external force which is not your friend. So in that situation it becomes very difficult. You can't win. It is unwinnable. Why do you say extremist? I mean, there is nothing extremist in Islam. Ask any Pakistani. I don't know about you, but if I were to ask you honestly, I would say, put your hand on your heart and say, should the Americans win in Afghanistan? Or should they lose? What would be your answer?
Does their losing actually mean a win for Taliban?
Not necessarily. Win for Afghan nation. Win for the spirit of freedom. Win for Islam. Because they say it's an ideological conflict. So win for Islam.
I must admit I found Hamid Gul's views very disturbing. He has a very romantic notion of the Taliban and a totally monolithic and rigid view of Islam. As head of the military's intelligence, I think he must have had many officers under his command who would be influenced by him. And I wonder how many current officers also share his views.
The U.S. was only able to capture or kill one major al-Qaeda figure and no Taliban figures.
You know, the fact is right now today, we don't have any high-ranking Taliban or al-Qaeda. We haven't really captured anybody, one or two on the fringe.
His understanding of the government's actions before 9/11 now fundamentally changed. Thompson decided to take a similar look into what happened in Afghanistan.
The press never looked very closely at how so many of these leaders were able to escape. However, if you piece together a number of different news accounts, you can begin to understand the story.
In August 2005, a story broke that gave Paul Thompson a missing piece of the puzzle. In an exclusive interview with Newsweek, the CIA field commander in Tora Bora during the invasion, Gary Bernson, broke his silence. He explained that his intelligence operatives had tracked bin Laden to Tora Bora.
Mr. Bernstein feels so strongly about getting this story out and getting his book published that he actually resigned 2 years short of retirement from the CIA in order to publish his book.
At the time of this interview, he was required to speak through his attorney until the CIA cleared his book for publication.
At various points in time, they did have, to my understanding, definitive intelligence as to his general location within Tora Bora. I can't go into detail as to the actual sources of the intelligence and the collection methods because those remain classified. However, we had Osama bin Laden essentially cornered in Tora Bora, and for whatever reasons, we did not do what was necessary in order to ensure that he did not escape.
The goal has never been to get bin Laden. Obviously, that's desirable.
Our side in that battle had the enemy surrounded. There were a reported perhaps 8,000 enemy forces in there.
Oh, they had the cream of the crop of al-Qaeda caught.
Journalist Seymour Hersh later broke this story in the New Yorker magazine, briefly sparking TV news coverage.
And from there, all of a sudden, one night around Thanksgiving, in the middle of the siege, an air corridor was set up between Kunduz and northern Pakistan. And at night, Pakistani relief planes regularly flew through that corridor.
It was a very orderly, organized thing that armed men would stand on the tarmac waiting for a flight that would come in, and then they would be taken out.
As many as 4,000 or 5,000. They were not only al-Qaeda, but maybe even some of bin Laden's immediate family were flown out on those evacuations.
It had to be done with the blessing of Musharraf, didn't
exactly,
it?
And of the United States.
When I tell you it comes at the level of Don Rumsfeld, it has to.
What we're describing here is something which would clearly be noticed by the United States. One or two, maybe not, okay? An airlift of these proportions, it certainly would.
This is the most secure space on the face of the earth right now. If someone's moving over Afghanistan, the United States knows about it, clearly.
No plane could fly from Kunduz to Pakistan without getting shot down unless we let it happen. And we let it happen, and I think there's just no other way to explain it.
My take on it basically is the fact that there is some sort of a deal in place between the government of Pakistan and the United States.
I'm not suggesting from this that Pakistan is the quote-unquote solution to 9/11, because it's not. Pakistan is one part in a very complicated story. But the question to me is, who else was involved with al-Qaeda? Was al-Qaeda used as a tool? Just as in the 1980s, the Mujahedin were basically used by the U.S. government.
The biggest crime in American history, orchestrated by Osama bin Laden with funds from the bin Laden and Saudi royal families, plane loads of whom were given special dispensation to leave the U.S. almost immediately afterwards, essentially with no interviews to determine what they might know.
No, they just got up and left. The FBI is not been allowed to put Saudis on a terrorism list up until September 11th. They were not allowed to ask these people any questions.
15 of the 19 hijackers had been Saudi nationals. So in the terrible aftermath of September 11th, surely it was now time to track down those who provided money and support for 9/11 wherever they might be, right? Wrong again, according to former CIA insider Robert Baer.
That's obviously not true, because everybody that financed September 11th is currently in Saudi Arabia and free. I mean, it was sort of like if bin Laden had said, well, you know, it's just a coincidence my guys happened to run into your towers. Are we just going to leave him alone?
The U.S. has relentlessly prosecuted its war on terror, first invading Afghanistan, which unquestionably harbored and supported al-Qaeda, then occupying Iraq, which had virtually nothing to do with Osama bin Laden. But despite all their with us or against us rhetoric, the U.S. has given Saudi Arabia, which spawned the mastermind, the manpower, and the money for 9/11, a free pass. The CIA, for example, ignored intelligence about the hijackers gathered by a number of foreign countries before and after September 11th. The Fifth Estate has obtained documents like these phone records from German intelligence showing calls made by key members of the 9/11 plot to Saudi Arabia that the Americans chose not to pursue. And nowhere was that attitude more obvious than in the report of the congressional investigation into the September 11th attacks. The hearings on Capitol Hill began several months after 9/11, focusing on what U.S. intelligence agencies knew or should have known. Eleanor Hill was the committee's chief investigator.
In the fall of 1998, the intelligence community received information concerning a bin Laden plot involving aircraft.
The much-anticipated report was more than 800 pages long. But since it was released, most of the attention has focused on 28 of those pages. One chapter that is almost completely redacted, ordered classified by the White House, and blacked out to the public.
And because they're classified, I can't tell you what's in those pages. I can tell you that the chapter deals with information that our committees found in FBI and CIA files that was very disturbing. It had to do with sources of foreign support for the hijackers, or alleged sources of foreign support for the hijackers.
Yeah. Now, I know it is believed and has been reported that many of those 27 or 28 redacted pages deal with the Saudi relationship to the hijackers, but...
That's what the press has said. I haven't said that.
In fact, others familiar with those 28 blacked-out pages confirm that much of the secret material about foreign support for the 9/11 hijackers does indeed deal with Saudi Arabia. What's more, some of the classified material also appears in unclassified areas of the report. In other words, if you know where to look, there's more than enough there to reveal exactly what it is the Bush administration would prefer the public doesn't know. So Eleanor Hill could tell us the story of a Saudi government employee based in California, a man named Omar al-Bayoumi.
According to the report, at least one, the FBI's best source in San Diego, suggested Bayoumi may be a Saudi intelligence officer. You can then say that Mr. Bayoumi, according to the report, did certainly help and assist the hijackers, at least two of them.
Those two 9/11 hijackers were Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. They were Saudis too, and reportedly the first of the 19 hijackers to enter the U.S. Guess who was there to meet them?
Basically, Mr. Bayoumi had significant contacts with Mihdhar and Hazmi in California. He put down the deposit for them on their apartment there. He threw a party for them.
Helped them enroll in flight school.
He tasked another individual to act as their translator, help them enroll in flight schools.
Not only does the congressional report detail the Saudi support for those two hijackers, it also reveals how much American intelligence already knew about them by the time they got to San Diego. They'd been under surveillance at a high-level al-Qaeda meeting abroad, where U.S. agents certainly suspected they were planning future terror attacks. The CIA knew their names, birth dates, passport numbers. They knew one of them had a U.S. entry visa, which likely meant they'd planned to travel there. But despite it all, the CIA somehow neglected to warn other U.S. agencies about them, which meant that al-Mihdhar and al-Hazmi were able to enter the country without a problem and settle in San Diego, even amazingly renew their U.S. visas so they could stay legally until they played their part on September the 11th.
level. Yeah.
Congressional investigator Eleanor Hill says it was perhaps the single most crucial intelligence failure before 9/11.
Had the FBI been told that and been aware of that back in January 2000, things may have been very different. We had the FBI agent from San Diego who handled that informant testify in our closed hearing that he believes that had he had that information from the CIA, he would have been able to stop this, because he believes he would have had what he called a full court press in terms of investigation on Midhar and Hazmi while they were living in San Diego.
But in fact, it wasn't until August 2001 that the two Saudis in San Diego were finally put on the U.S. watch list. By then, it was tragically too late. 3 weeks afterwards, they crashed American Airlines Flight 77 into the Pentagon.
Abdullah is well aware of the challenges facing him at home. And internationally, Saudi policies were being questioned since the revelation that 15 of the 19 terrorists who attacked on 9/11 were Saudi citizens. In 2002, families of those who perished brought a $1 trillion lawsuit against Arab banks, charitable organizations, and 3 Saudi royal princes, including Prince Sultan, the defense minister, and Prince Turki Al Faisal, ambassador to Britain. The lawsuit charged that they had supported terrorist groups like al-Qaeda, responsible for the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon.
Although we cannot prove that high-ranking Saudi officials committed this atrocity, we know for a certainty that they were the terrorists' travel agents who delivered them well-fed, well-trained, and well-equipped to the World Trade Center that day.
The lawsuit added to the already strained relations between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and the royal family threatened to take billions of its assets out of America.
U.S. senators held a hearing on the financial support of terrorism. They asked government officials to provide the names of the Saudi charities and individuals who've been investigated for funding al-Qaeda.
I know the chairman tried very hard and others have tried very hard to get this information, so let me try again. Okay. Are the names of those entities classified? The names classified that you have recommended for listing? It's a yes or no question.
The names themselves are not classified.
Then I think you ought to present them to us today.
I don't have them with me.
Mr. Newcomb. Senators were promised they'd get the names the next day. But overnight, the Bush administration classified them. That list, with the names of the Saudis suspected of financing Osama bin Laden, would not be made public, after all.
As an individual that was affiliated with...
When George Bush Sr. became president, as with George W. more than a decade later, the Saudis occupied a special place at the White House. The Oval Office always open to one man, Saudi Arabia's ambassador, Prince Bandar.
What is the George W. Bush calls Bandar? Bandar Bush?
Bandar Bush, yeah, calls him Bandar Bush.
الأمن السعودي كان متابع.
Saudi security was actively following the movements of most of the terrorists with precision.
ولو الجهات الأمنية الأمريكية
U.S. security authorities had engaged their Saudi counterparts in a serious and credible manner. In my opinion, we would have avoided what happened.
I'd flown to Washington to meet an ex-Secret Service agent who's never spoken publicly before.
Mr. Caruso, I'm Jane Corbin. Nice to meet you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
David Caruso is an expert in money laundering who found out a great deal about Prince Bandar's financial arrangements in America. After 9/11, when most of the al-Qaeda hijackers turned out to be Saudi, Mr. Caruso was called in by the ambassador's bankers, Riggs Bank. They wanted to find out if any funds were going to terrorists from the Saudi embassy.
Those funds were in Prince Bandar's account and his wife's account.
So there was substantial amounts of cash?
Yes, there were large sums. It was a large relationship. It was a $100+ million relationship.
$100+ million.
Mr. Caruso did identify many suspicious transactions in some of the embassy accounts.
What we discovered was clearly large movements of money, both cash and other types of money, that we simply could not understand.
And was the Saudi ambassador himself, Prince Bandar, prepared to tell you what lay at the root of all this?
We were never able to get those answers.
And did you worry? Did you think this sounds fishy?
Absolutely.
Riggs Bank could never get satisfactory answers from Bandar or his embassy, so they closed down all their accounts. Within months, the prince had resigned as ambassador for personal reasons and headed back to Saudi. Prince Bandar declined an interview, but his lawyers have admitted payments were made into Riggs Bank with the UK and Saudi government's approval. Bandar was a signatory, they said, but the money went for purposes approved by the Saudi Ministry of Defense, not for him personally. But the big question remains, why were such huge payments made by such a secretive and convoluted route, and what were they for? Here's a last word from the prince on the subject of corruption.
We did not invent corruption. This happened since Adam and Eve. I mean, Adam and Eve were in heaven, and they had hanky-panky, and they had to go down to earth. So, I mean, this is human nature. But we are not as bad as you think.
After George Bush Sr. left office and became a senior advisor to the powerful international investment firm, the Carlyle Group, he paid a number of visits on their behalf to his good friends, the Saudi royal family and the bin Ladens.
A very nice reunion with friends. I'm very pleased to see you.
They soon became Carlyle clients. Incredibly, on September 11th, Bush and the head of the bin Laden family would be at the same Carlyle Group meeting in Washington, just a few miles from where Osama bin Laden's hijackers would attack the Pentagon.
9/11 was not an intelligence failure. 9/11 was an intelligence success. It was supposed to happen. The moment in time when the world accepted that the intelligence justifying the invasion of Iraq was a lie, that we were sold a war on false pretenses, then 9/11 has to be on the table too. Clearly the United States government could have prevented the attacks, and the United States government held the door open and allowed those attacks to happen.
That seems to be the common denominator of most 9/11 conspiracy theories, that somehow the U.S. government knew those attacks were coming, yet let them take place anyway.
It's not an issue of a narrow group of advisors, the so-called neocons, in the Pentagon and the State Department. It's a much broader process where particular groups of officials may come to rotate from one administration to the next, so as to ensure the U.S. Agenda of sequential theater wars, which is outlined in the PNAC. Senior officials within the Bush administration were involved in acts of complicity and camouflage with regard to the events of 9/11. And this is not simply a question of foreknowledge. It's the fact that the CIA has supported al-Qaeda, that al-Qaeda is an intelligence asset, that al-Qaeda has performed on behalf of United States covert operations in different parts of the world. It's not a blowback to the era of the Cold War. Once you recognize that al-Qaeda is a creature of U.S. foreign policy and of the U.S. intelligence apparatus, your understanding and perceptions on 9/11 are totally different to what they might be in the case where you're, an anti-war activist who wants to change the course of foreign policy, etc., etc. Because the lie ultimately behind this, this camouflage and complicity is so grotesque. And I'm not suggesting necessarily that the Bush administration ordered the destruction of the World Trade Center, but if the Bush administration is saying that al-Qaeda is behind it, and that al-Qaeda is a threat to America, while at the same time we have evidence that al-Qaeda is collaborating with U.S. government agencies in covert operations in the Balkans, and that this happened, you know, barely a few months before 9/11, that we have evidence that that Pakistan's inter-services intelligence, its military intelligence, supports the terrorists and supports these terrorist organizations, and that's corroborated by the Council on Foreign Relations. If that is true on the one hand, and if on the other hand, this same organization, Pakistan's ISI, has close bilateral relations with the CIA, with State Department, I mean, I'm talking at the very, very senior levels, then there's something fundamentally fishy on these links. Go beneath the surface, you then realize that in fact Osama bin Laden is a creature of the U.S. Intelligence apparatus. His whereabouts are known. Al-Qaeda has collaborated with the U.S. military and intelligence and continues to collaborate. When you start looking into, let's say, the Bali bombing, and then you realize that the Bali bombing is conducted by a group which was trained in CIA camps in Afghanistan, that it has close links to Indonesian intelligence, and that Indonesian intelligence has close links to the CIA, well, then you say, well, there's something fishy there as well. In the context of the Iran-Contra scandal, where Oliver North, of course, was indicted, along with Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger, they were the visible personalities in the scandal, but the individual, the person within the U.S. military who actually played a very key role was Colin Powell, because Colin Powell signed the release forms for the transfer of weapons from logistics to Iran, and with the proceeds of those weapons sales, they funded the Mujahedin, the Islamic brigades, as well as the Nicaraguan Contra. And we also know that Richard Armitage was behind that as well. So these individuals have, over the years, played a role in the process of support, of building and creating these Islamic brigades. And today they say, Colin Powell in the United Nations Security Council will go in and say, we have to go after the terrorists. Saddam Hussein is linking up with Osama bin Laden, they're buddies and so on. The fact of the matter is that after September 11, on September 13th, when the head of Pakistan's ISI, General Mahmoud Ahmad, was invited into the State Department to negotiate the terms of Pakistan's cooperation in the war on terrorism, he negotiated with Colin Powell and Richard Armitage. There were meetings held behind closed doors on the 12th and the 13th of September with the head of Pakistan's inter-services intelligence. Yet at the same time, the Bush administration knew, the FBI knew, the CIA knew, that this same individual was behind the transfer of money to the terrorists, as confirmed by an FBI report published in late September. They also knew of the historical link between the ISI and the terrorists. Obviously, they knew because they're behind it. The CIA is at the pinnacle of this relationship. CIA, ISI, Al-Qaeda. That understanding, I think, is crucial. in an anti-war movement, we have to understand that the main political actors are criminals. They are war criminals, but they're involved in a process of deceit, using the instruments of intelligence, presenting the war on terrorism as an objective of U.S. foreign policy, when in fact they are the architects of these terrorist organizations.